Oh, we boldly predicted that they would have to sing, too, before this thing debuted, and of course...
Hey, we roll deep in humility over here, all three of us. It takes a village to debrief after an emotional 3 months of 1883. Does anyone else feel like this show cost you a year of your life? Anyone else feel it was worth it? The finale dropped on February 27th, and the Dutton Rules team went back and watched one more time to pick out any clues, Easter eggs, or explanations we missed the first time around. And I do mean the entire Dutton Rules team. I'm Addison Hager, and today both Billy Dukes and Sterling Whitaker will join me for a roundtable conversation about the Yellowstone origin story. Together, we will work through the best moments of episode 10, the things we missed, hot takes for the future of this franchise, and the confusing James and John Dutton relationship. At the end, we'll give our grades for the series. I want to know your grade. Email staff@tasteofcountry.com to share what you liked and didn't care for about the plot, scenery, pacing, or acting. Either myself or Billy Dukes will return your email, and on Monday we will provide an answer to last week's trivia question. Courtesy reminder to tap follow and then leave a rating and review when possible. Reviews are especially useful to us as we've got designs on season 2 of the Dutton Rules podcast, and we'd love to know what we can do better. Access old episodes for cast interviews from both 1883 and Yellowstone. Cole Hauser, Tim McGraw, Sam Elliott, and Kelly Riley are just a few of my personal favorites. And then there's that tricky interview with Eric Nelson, which I know one member of our team has some thoughts on that today. Did Ennis do us dirty? Let's find out as we bring in Billy and Sterling right now.
Hello, Addison!
Hello, Billy. Man, just when I thought that we were done, we're not. We are still here on 1883, and I'm still here to talk about it. Surprisingly, my emotions are still hanging on by a thread.
There's a lot to unpack, and I've gotten a ton of emails, and we're not going to get to any of them this week. Let's save the Q&As for Monday's episode of the podcast, because we got something a little different planned for today.
I know, I'm excited. Our very own Sterling Whitaker, which if you've been following the podcast for a while now, he is the insight guy for all of our fun cast interviews. And Sterling and I have done some podcast episodes here. But today you get the trio, which is fun. We haven't done this before.
Hello.
Hey, Sterling.
How are you guys today?
Good. And for those who are listening right now, we've got the hat game going on. Billy has a beanie on. I've got a trucker hat. And Sterling, what would you call your hat?
This is an Irish flat cap.
Oh, we love that. That all describes our personalities right there.
Mine's more of a haven't showered yet today kind of look that I got going on.
You're showing all your cards. We weren't going to get there.
Right.
Well, I want to start off this episode. What was y'all's favorite part? Which I will say I'm jumping straight into spoilers. So at this point, if you're listening to this episode and you haven't watched the finale of 1883, you might want to press pause because this episode is going to just be chock full of spoilers.
You know, it's hard to say any of it was like a favorite part because there was so much tragedy. It's like, which death and tragedy did you like the best?
Honestly, yeah.
That amputation scene, that was a rollicking good time. My favorite moments, I think, probably, you have to go right to the end in those moments between James and Elsa. It was such great acting. As a father, I certainly felt that. You saw new sides of Tim McGraw. We've known Tim McGraw for so long as a country singer, and we have a really good relationship with him. Taste of Country, we cover country music news. I've talked to Tim a number of times, probably to the point where, he recognizes me when I come in the room. I don't know necessarily if I was, out to eat, he would come over and say hi. But I've seen only clearly one side of his personality because he has this softer, sentimental side that we've never seen in the country music space. But that was really on full display really the last few episodes of 1883, but especially those final moments when he loses it and breaks down over his dead daughter's body. So touching.
Powerful stuff.
It was, yeah, phenomenal acting. Sterling, what was yours?
You know, and again, I mean, what is your favorite part of a thing that's just a string of tragedy? It's really hard to beat for me, Shay at the very end. And it was something that I thought might be coming. And even though it was somewhat predictable, you know, just seeing him, to me, that was almost like an honorable way for him to go out. He had said early on in the thing that he found another character's choice to take their life to be brave. And so for him, it's like, that's the only way he could have rapped, is to take his own life on his own terms, you know?
Wow, that's a very, very unique perspective, because I definitely, when I saw that scene, because I will say, even though it was a scene that in previous episodes of this podcast, I told Billy, you know, this entire time he had been predicting Shay's going to die, and Miss Hopeful Addison over here said, oh, but he's not. And so you get to that scene, and I thought, oh, amazing. I get to tell Billy, I told you Shay was going to live. And then, yes, ends up shooting himself. And I mean, literally, I was like, well, okay, my thoughts continually are not correct. But what I loved about that scene, and so it is my favorite scene from the last episode, but what I think that they did a really, really good job on is that hummingbird part of where he's looking out at the ocean. And I was doing a little bit of research after this scene, because I couldn't decide, you know, is it resembling his wife, or is it resembling Elsa? And there's a scene right before, as James and Elsa are going off to find her final resting place, she tells Shay, you know, I'll meet you at the beach. And
That's
so
right.
I'm assuming that hummingbird's supposed to be representing Elsa. And I just thought if that is correct, I thought that was a really, really well done metaphor and just imagery. I enjoyed that part. I didn't love it when he shot himself, but interesting take on what you were saying, if he had said, you know, kind of the honorable way of going out on his own terms.
I think you're right, and I didn't catch it until the second time through. I watched the episode again with my wife, and she immediately said, oh, Elsa's there.
That's
So
right.
it clicked for
interesting.
her.
Yeah.
How do you think they did that hummingbird scene? Like, how did they get that hummingbird? And the answer could be obvious, but so much of the show was filmed on location. Like, that's one trained hummingbird.
Right. Like they have a
You know,
hummingbird wrangler on set, right?
I hate to crush both of y'all's pride and joy over here, but I really think, you know, some solid after post-production
CGI,
was part of this scene. But who knows? Maybe there's an incredibly trained hummingbird out there that they just called up and are getting immense royalties at this point. But I'm just not, you know, I'm going to let you guys run with that theory, but I'm not going to say I'm jumping on the train with you, but I love it.
Okay.
Yeah. How does that even work? Like, what is the going rate for a hummingbird's day fee when it comes? You know what I mean?
And
I'm not even sure how that would work arrangement wise.
They say it's the most expensive show ever created, and it probably has to do because they had to pay all these damn birds.
Right? And the cattle,
Really,
like,
the
what's a
bird
cattle
budget was
fee a
just-
day, right?
Oh my gosh. This episode actually turns into how much the livestock and animals on 1883 were paid. Oh my gosh. Is there anything, and either one of y'all can speak to this, Sterling, you might have a little bit more insight here. Is there anything that we missed that, you know, like I said, the hummingbird aspect, or is there anything that maybe watching it the first time viewers might not have picked up on?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I missed completely, not just in this episode, but all along the way is, and in retrospect, it seems so incredibly clear, the sort of stock footage still that they released in advance of the show. It looks like an old historical photograph of the family, and Elsa's not in it. And it's just like they told us before you even start the thing. It's like, hey, by the way, you know, she's not here anymore. And we saw that, you know, every day of this thing. And I never picked up on the fact that obviously she's gone, you know?
You know, not only is she not in it, it's almost as if there's a space where she would be. Like it's a photo framed for 4 people.
That's true.
Wow, I never noticed that.
That's true. Yeah. So there was that. And I mean, I just looked at that and thought, well, that's just foolish not to have seen that, months ago. But that's the kind of thing Taylor Sheridan does. He plants these things and then he brings them back around and slaps you on the other side of the head with it on the other side,
Yeah.
Well, and something I've noticed about him is he's someone who's going to a little bit just hide it in plain sight. Like what you see is what you get. And at least for me, as we've seen, I try to, conceptualize a bigger picture. And I'm like, well, but this could happen, this. And Billy's really, kept me on track of like, no. What you see is what you get. And kind of like that. Like he hid it in plain sight. He's not tricking anyone. But we just try to, don't even necessarily, note to that. But then also it's just one of those, you try to make it what it's not. And Taylor Sheridan's going like, no, this is what you're seeing is literally what it is.
Right. And in regard to the character of Shay and how that wrapped up, it strikes me, this kind of struck me all along the way, but even more so in retrospect, it strikes me that he said out loud in his own words every time that he could how it was going to go. When he was talking to Elsa about honoring his wife, he said, I'm going to take her to the ocean and she'll see it through my eyes. And then I'll see her. Well, his wife is dead, so there's only one way to see her, And I mean, and then
that's good.
In talking with Taylor Sheridan's character, he said, next time I see you, and he said, no, this is my last trail. This is goodbye. He knew all along what he was going to do when he got where he was going.
Is there anything else that we might have missed?
One thing that Billy pointed out is in the last episode, as it's kind of opening and Elsa says, I see things more clearly through my fever than I did before. There's birds circling up ahead, and that generally foreshadows death, in a Taylor Sheridan kind of production. It's been a device he's used multiple times in Yellowstone and 1883.
Something that surprises me is people are still hesitant to believe. They're still kind of holding on to this whimsical notion that Elsa lived. And at this point, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm getting emails where people are explaining how she still is out there somehow hoofing along on this Montana ranch. But I think everything about this show was so straightforward and real. Like, it's not that kind of show. No one has ever been brought back from the dead. Previously in this podcast, I tried to say that they were going to bring the character of the Beck brother back to life somehow. And that was just notoriously wrong. You're dead. You're dead. No one's coming back.
Right. What I want to know is, so do we understand what the episodes that are coming in the fall are? Because they seem completely superfluous, right? It's like if she's dead and, Shay's dead and Thomas and what in the hell are they going to be doing in the fall, right? That we want to see. So I guess I could I don't believe that Elsa is alive, but if she was alive, you could say that those will be like a surprise. She's still alive, but then they have to find a way to kill her a second time in a few episodes or it makes no sense,
I think maybe they need more of a bridge between 1883 and 1932, so they kind of wrote these episodes. There's only a couple of unanswered questions, and the biggest one is, whose baby is Spencer, that other boy that is sitting around the Dutton family table during the flashbacks from season 4 of Yellowstone? That's the one big question we still don't know the answer to, so to some extent they need to explain that. But maybe we just need a little bit more action to get us to the point when 1932 starts, we understand what's going on. I suspect they've already filmed it because they say they have filmed in temperatures that were below zero, and I didn't see that kind of weather during anything from this season of 1883.
No, unless they're phenomenal at acting, not cold. Yeah, no.
Right.
That's not a thing. But I will say, touching on, Billy, what you just said a few minutes ago, where you said, they're dead, we're not bringing them back. There's a character, let's just talk about Ennis for a second, who we thought, I mean, in his interview with you, we thought he was still taping, but we never saw him again. So do we think he was giving you kind of a run for your money, or what is up? We never saw Ennis again. And I am a diehard Ennis fan, as you guys know. So I was excited, I was ready, and we got nothing.
It would appear that Ennis is a big fat liar. That's all I can say.
Signed, sealed, delivered.
Well, the actor Eric Nelson told me a couple of things. One, he insinuated that as soon as we were done with that interview, he had more filming to do. In fact, he said that.
Right.
He said he had more filming to do, leading us to believe that he was going to appear in more scenes down the road. It's possible that whatever scenes he filmed just got cut from the finale. Maybe the flashback where Elsa sees her version of Heaven Has Sam, maybe it was also going to include Ennis at some point.
Ooh,
I guess we can consider that. Yeah, I don't know how that would have worked. Sam didn't seem like the kind of guy who was here for that, necessarily. No. Or he could have just been fleecing me. But the other thing that he said was that 1883 was definitely envisioned as a show that was going to go on for 2, 3, or 4 seasons. He said it wasn't written as a 1-season story arc. And that absolutely proved not to be true in the case. It was always written as sort of this 10-ish hour movie that'll just get us to the next series. So in both cases, Ennis turned out to be a big fat liar.
You hate to see it.
Or he didn't know any better. He might not have known the truth, I suppose. I'll give him that benefit of the doubt.
Well, touching on all 4 shows, so we've got Yellowstone, we have 1883, we have the upcoming 1932, and then we have the 4 Sixes Ranch. Do you guys have a hot take on any of these? What do we think is going to happen?
I do have a hot take. It's pinned in logic, but I think it'll be a little bit controversial. And it kind of ties 1883 to Yellowstone. Beth Dutton and Elsa Dutton are related by name only. And I think there's this temptation to kind of pair them up because they're both strong, independent women and they share some similar physical similarities. But the truth is, what drives Elsa is innate. She's instinctively drawn to the land and that adventure. And Beth is really a byproduct of circumstance. On her own, she's not a rancher or even a country girl. She acts like she does because she's learned throughout time that when she makes decisions out of fear, it goes really poorly. And you can think back to that scene where the sterilization when she's a teenager. That's probably the best example of it. She's extremely loyal to her father, like Elsa, but she's loyal because she blames herself for the death of his wife and her mother, which we see during, I think, season 1. She's responding, whereas Elsa is out there in control, sort of controlling her own fate. Furthermore, Beth's not a hero. She's a villain. She's a villain on the home team, I think, but the way she behaves and her lack of empathy, it's not applaudable by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we do not want our daughters to grow up to be like Beth Dutton. She has some great lines and some great quotes that look good on T-shirts, but that's about it. I think the number one person who may not realize this, though, is the actor that plays Beth. That's kind of the second part of my hot take here, but I will stop to give you all a moment to react to the Beth and Elsa not being the same person hot take I have.
I hadn't thought of that, but you're right.
To be honest, I really haven't tried to pair them together.
People want to say that it's Bethany and Elsa somehow shared a name. Elizabeth, Elsa. Remember we had that conversation a few weeks back that maybe right. Elizabeth was, and it ended up being for naught because Beth is actually Bethany, not Elizabeth. But a lot of people want to kind of just put, blonde with blonde or strong woman with strong woman, but their motivations are totally different. I don't know if there is a parallel on Yellowstone for what Elsa Dutton represents, and it could be Casey, to be honest.
You're probably right about that too. Or even though she's not really Dutton by blood, I could even say Monica is more like Elsa. Not as bold, but she's more of a moral center of the show.
I think ultimately I'm over here just not. I'm not trying to bridge the two together. And that might be wrong on my behalf, but yeah, I don't know.
The other part of this is I think that Kelly Riley might be a little bit too close to the character of Beth. And I've noticed this in interviews with Kelly. She has like this sort of reverence for Beth that I think kind of borders on like an infatuation for the character. And I kind of wonder if it's going to have some sort of mental side effects for her, because ultimately, I think Beth is going to die. Like Shay, death seems to be Beth's ultimate destiny, and
right,
man, she's really close to that character. It scares me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good question. With Yellowstone coming out, who do you think, with season 5 coming out, who do we think? I mean, Billy, it sounds like you think Beth's going to die. I mean, Sterling, do you have a character that you think is going to be the one to kind of be the Shay?
I don't know if this is all that much of a hot take, or maybe it's just what's been staring us all in the face all along. I think Yellowstone has to end, ultimately, with John dying and they lose their land. That has to be the way that goes, right?
John dies.
Yeah. Doesn't he have to die? Yeah. That's the only thing that makes any sense. There's not going to be him sitting around with the grandkids at Easter, one day. That's just not the way that character's going to go. He's too dark a character, right?
Yeah. Billy, would you agree?
Who gets the land?
Good question, right? I mean, a developer, or does the tribe somehow get it back after all these multi-generational infighting? I mean, that was, and you kind of pointed out that was implied in the last episode of 1883.
I think the natives get the land back after what you just said, Sterling, after that conversation that we had, the last podcast episode of them talking about, in 7 generations. And granted, we don't know really, as we've tried to figure out what that 7th generation actually is. But I think it ends, like you said, John dying, them giving up the land. But surely it goes to the natives. I mean, maybe the developers, and this might just be the hopeful side in me, but I would hope that it wouldn't end that way. But the Yellowstone, Taylor Sheridan's, all of his series tend to just leave me really just with a crushed heart. So not putting too much stock there.
I'm torn on who gets the land, because, the natives getting it would almost present something of a happy ending. And I don't see the Yellowstone getting any sense of a happy ending.
Yeah.
I could almost see the whole family dying, honestly. I could almost see everybody going down,
What about Tate?
Gosh.
You think Tate is going to die too?
Maybe not Tate. Maybe Tate's the one holdout. But I could see Casey, John, Beth, and even Jamie all dying together. Rip, somehow they all go down together. I don't know. I mean, you don't
Y'all
put
will have
anything
to check me into therapy if that's how this goes. Expense that.
Sterling.
Yeah.
But who gets a happy ending when you look at such dark people? Who's supposed to live on and go to like PTA meetings and, sit around on the porch when they're old? I mean, I just don't see it for any of these people. Monica, maybe.
I think Casey and Monica come out on top. Yeah, that's my prediction. Hey, Addison, remind me in like a couple few days to do a wellness check on Sterling, because he seems kind of dark and down.
We'll check
down
for
his feels right now.
That's funny.
This time next week, we'll circle back to you, Sterling.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Well, I'm interested to hear y'all's take on 4 6s. As you guys know, I love Jimmy, Jefferson White's character. I am very, as hopeful as I am, and as much as I love watching him and Emily on screen and just everything that he embodied once he left the Dutton Ranch, I'm very interested to see how the 4 6s show is going to really stand on its own. I don't know.
Well, it doesn't seem to have a natural plot baked into it, which is interesting. Right. So I don't know what the storyline is. It could just be kind of, and pardon the expression, more horse porn, as we've seen throughout Yellowstone, where they just show the cutting and the roping and the tricking, which is cool.
Right.
It kind of could lead us into that competitive world, and I think that'd be some good storytelling. I've said all along that I think that show's going to need some bigger names to be successful, and they should have no problem attracting those kind of actors at this point. But it's not clear what the plot line is going to be, because it's not an origin story of any sense for Yellowstone like 1932 and 1883 are. It's more like the Sylvester Stallone show, or even Mayors of Kingstown, where it has some similar characters that might intersect with Yellowstone, but it's going to be its own show. So,
Right.
I don't know either.
Yeah, no, I have absolutely no sense of where that might go. Some of the asides that they did shoot there were interesting, but they were interesting because of Jimmy and his character arc.
Right.
And now his character arc, I wouldn't say it's wrapped, but he's matured and become, a quote unquote real cowboy. And I don't see where you go from there. If you don't hang it around him, then what do you hang it around? I don't have a sense at all of where that show might go, or if it could be more than one season.
Well, just a reminder for those who are listening, staff@tasteofcountry.com is the email if you guys have any thoughts on any of these 4 shows. We'd love to hear them. Sterling, we have been waiting for this moment. I know you and I have, talked about it here and there, and then we've, kind of stopped ourselves going, oh, we can't tell people yet. But I want to hear Sam Elliott spoiler that he blurted out during the roundtable that you got to be a part of. Now's the time. I want to hear it.
Well, we really have been sitting on this, and for those who are unaware of it, we actually reached out to the network and said, hey, he said this legitimately while it was being recorded. Can it be used? And they went back and forth internally for a few weeks before finally reaching back out and saying, nope, sorry, this has to, remain confidential until the end of the season. So there's actually been some back and forth. But yeah, we're sitting there in this round table with everybody, and I don't even know how this came up. Oh, yes, I do. He was talking about his relationship with LaMonica Garrett and the close relationship between their characters as well as them. And he says, well, in that laconic voice of his, well, it's like dragging words out of an actual stone, I can't really go there just for the fans. And then he kind of looks away and he says, and at this point, we don't even know that Thomas and Noemi are going to be a couple, obviously, because the show hasn't even debuted. And he says, Thomas and his love. And then he says, they're one of the only 2. And then he stops himself. And he says, I can't really say it. And he says, then you can see he makes the decision. He looks right into the camera and he says, Thomas makes it to Oregon. And then he just starts laughing to himself. So all along, I've been sitting on this, dying to just spill it, It's
like a little kid when you tell him not to do something and then he looks and just touches it, touches the stove or whatever. He's like, oh, I'm just going to go for it.
It was really hard to reconcile that throughout the season because they spent so much of the season so far away from Oregon.
I know.
And at times we didn't think anybody was going to make it out of Oklahoma, let alone to Montana and Oregon. So I was like, okay, how is this all going to work? And I mean, it did. Somehow it did.
I honestly didn't really expect almost everybody to die, except right toward the end, I started to realize, oh my God, he's going to kill literally almost everybody. There's like just a handful. What are there, like 7 people left alive at the end of this thing? How many actual? I don't know. There's the family.
We're counting now. We got the hands and the fingers
out.
Yeah,
so sorry. Addison has the hands.
Yeah.
You have.
There's the Dutton 3.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yep. Noemi, her 2 sons. We're up to 6.
That's 7.
Thomas,
right?
7.
Right.
Shay dies.
Good old Yosef.
Yosef,
okay.
8.
8. That's it.
Y'all.
Right? 8 people.
Well, Colton and Wade, I think.
Fate unknown.
We can count them among the living.
Fate unknown at the moment, yeah.
I will
10
say,
tops.
I was incredibly surprised that Yosef made it through this entire series. I was expecting him to die. And so when we end this series and he's off, in beautiful, building his own little shelter, I almost said fort, when he's starting, you can tell that he's going to put down roots. I'm like, wow, buddy, you were a character that I would have not placed money on you for living. And you were here. I am wildly surprised.
I almost wonder if Taylor Sheridan didn't put in his own mind, does Yosef represent the true pioneer spirit to him? You know, because he makes a real journey from being a meek, kind of a weaker character to being the one guy that comes out of this come what may. You know, you've got half a leg, but you're still out there, you know, trudging along, trying to put down stakes, regardless of everything you've lost, which is basically everything.
I don't know how he's going to build that house with one leg. That is going to be a chore.
Yeah.
Hopefully he gets some help up in there.
This is why I have you guys on the podcast. We have Billy for the practical, and Sterling's giving us like the deep cuts, the big overarching meaning of things, and I'm just the navigator here. Well, and speaking of navigating, Billy, let's touch on just real quick for those who might have been confused when I was explaining a little bit earlier about the natives eventually taking over the land, and you know that they had said in 7 generations that would happen. We did this on the last episode of this podcast of trying to kind of explain that, but maybe let's refresh people of, I know I kind of need a diagram at this point, but yeah, kind of give us a little bit of a layout of generational wise what this looks like.
Well, it starts with how you believe James Dutton and John Dutton are related. And the best source we have for that is Taylor Sheridan, who in a behind-the-scenes episode of the show called The Road West said that James is the great-great-great-grandfather to John Dutton. People get really tripped up by all the different Johns. John Sr., and then John Dutton, as played by Kevin Costner. And they like to think that there's John Sr., the 5-year-old we saw on this show, played by Audie Rick. He presumably will have a kid named John Jr., and then people think, oh, well, then Kevin Costner's character must be John the Third. But that's not how junior seniors work. If that was the case, John Sr. would be John the Third, and you'd go from there. John Dutton, Kevin Costner's character, is not part of that name lineage. There's more generations in there. So here's how I have it broken down. You have James Dutton, and then you have John Sr., which is Audie Rick, the 5-year-old we see on the show. His son is going to be John Jr., and I suspect that John Jr. is going to be the heart and soul of the show 1932. John Sr. would be about 50, 55 years old at that point. His son is probably coming into his own. So that's third generation. John Jr. would be great-grandfather to John Dutton. Yes. John Jr.'s kid, who is born somewhere along the way, maybe we even see a baby, is going to be the fourth generation, and that is going to be John Dutton's grandfather. Fifth generation is going to be the the character played by Dabney Coleman on Yellowstone, John Dutton's dad. We saw how he died. Sixth generation John Dutton, as played by Kevin Costner. Seventh generation Casey Dutton, as played by Luke Grimes. Important to note is there are actually 2 separate characters named John Dutton Sr. Audie Rick's 5-year-old John Dutton Sr. is not the same as Dabney Coleman's John Dutton Sr., and they're both listed as senior in the credits of the show. But if they were the same, then John Dutton Sr. would be about 122 years old when we see him die during season 2 of Yellowstone. That's not possible. They're different characters. But this is all important because the natives said that in 7 generations, we're going to come take our land back. That's what the Indian elders said in the finale of 1883. So that's either Casey or Tate, and it ties right into what Casey saw on the mountaintop during his vision quest when he said, "I saw the end of us." I think that's what he was talking about. And that's why I think the natives could get the land back.
Right.
Yeah, right. My impersonation's always on top. My impersonation game, top notch once again.
Taylor Sheridan, once again, if you're listening to this, Billy is available for an extra.
I don't know how to explain it any more clearly. You do almost need a visual, but let's get out of our minds that John and James are just related by one great. Like James Dutton is not John's Dutton's great grandfather. There's at least 2, if not 3 greats. per the show's creator. And I don't know how you can argue with Taylor Sheridan on something that sprouted from his strange magical brain.
Yeah, right.
Strange magical brain. End quote. Well, ultimately, y'all, how would we score? I want to hear each one of y'all's, and I'll give mine as well at the end. How do we grade 1883? Dun, 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 dun. Billy, you're in the hot seat first.
So the A+ season of Taylor Sheridan's shows so far, for me personally, was season 2 of Yellowstone. This is the Beck brothers plotline. I really loved it. It was great fun to watch. It was brutal and vicious at times, but I wanted to come back to it, and I just burned through that entire season really, really quickly. I thought the acting was good. It developed a lot of plot lines. So that was like the A+ version. I didn't think season 4 of Yellowstone was an A+ by any stretch of the imagination. There was far too many loose ends. 1883, if we're holding it against what I think is the perfect season of this franchise, I have to give 1883 an A-. And here's why. One, there was at least one, if not 2 episodes that I struggled with in terms of just good TV. Episode 7, I think in particular, I thought there was just so much going on. And that was the episode where Charlie Goodnight appears out of nowhere. Right. Taylor Sheridan's got that crazy accent. And then the tornado, and then there's bandits and, cookies coming and going left and right. Like it felt very rushed and kind of thrown together. So I take a couple points off for that. And then also, I don't know if I'm just scrolling through the channels one day and I see an episode of 1883 on that I'm going to stop and watch ever. And I think great shows have that ability to bring you right back into it in the rerun stage. I'm good with 1883. I saw it. Yeah. I loved it. I don't want to dive in necessarily. The want to repeat this experience isn't there for me. So I take a couple of points off for that, and I land on an A- for 1883.
Okay. Sterling, what about you?
I'd have to give it a couple of different grades. I give it an A+ for intent and sort of execution in terms of you look at the epic scale of this thing and you can't believe anybody ever brought it to fruition in the amount of time that it was done. And for that, I can't find any fault because I surely couldn't have done any of it. It's not like I can second guess any of that. I actually agree with the A- in terms of what you actually got. I don't want to go down to a B+, but performing wise, great performances and all that. But there really are some things that could have been tightened up. For my personal, I could have lost every last one of the guest stars. I thought all of that was a little bit superfluous. Tom Hanks, you don't need Tom Hanks in there. It's just kind of to put Tom Hanks in there, and all of that kind of thing. Taylor Sheridan writing himself in, he didn't need to play that character. Anybody could have done it, so there is a little bit of squeezing, shoehorning some stuff in that wasn't directly related to the show, and that brings it down a little bit. But still, incredibly well acted, incredibly well directed. Cinematography is obviously exceptional, so...
Yeah, I'd say overall, I'd give it, I'm going down a little bit lower than y'all, but I'd say overall a B+. And I know some of that has to do with, obviously I loved this 1883 oozes historical facts and all that. And that's so great. And obviously that hooks, that Western type of drama hooks a lot of people. For me, I love, Yellowstone a little bit more of the romance drama, if you will. Mm-hmm. Something that's just a little bit easier to watch and you don't have to be so focused on it. So I think that's a little bit where that B+ comes from. And then similar to what you said, Sterling, I felt like there were moments, and I think I've said this in a previous podcast episode, where it almost felt like 1883 was the catalyst for the commercial for other shows. It was a little bit of I'm like, okay, is this a little bit promo for 6? Is this a little bit promo for Yellowstone? And I haven't really seen, other than season 4, I haven't seen the previous Yellowstone episode. So, I think what's interesting is even the little cameos that we had, and I don't feel like we saw that on season 4 of Yellowstone. And to your point as well, I felt like it was just a little bit forced, where I was like, all these guest stars we really could have done without, and they didn't add anything to the plot. If anything, I kind of felt like they were a little forced, but I'd say I came into the show with a B- on the acting, and I'd say I like acting in and of itself, I'd give it for sure an A. Faith Hill really nailed it.
Wow.
I was not, as you guys know, love Faith Hill, but man, I set the bar incredibly low for her acting abilities, just because she hadn't really played on much before, and goodness, a show like this where it's nothing but just heart and soul, and not as we know, not lighthearted. I didn't have many expectations there, and she blew any that I had out of the water. And Shay, LaMonica Garrett, like all of them, Elsa, or Isabel May, I was just thoroughly impressed with the acting. And then cinematography, I'd also give an A. Yeah. But yeah, I'd say overall for me it was a little lower, but I think a lot of that's just personal. I had a hard time sometimes, just wanting to stay hooked. Sometimes I just felt like it was a little bit drawn out, and that just might have been, the type of show I enjoy watching or not. So
I think it'd be funny to go back to listen to some of our first episodes talking about 1883, because I remember saying things like, Faith Hill, she hasn't acted much. I bet you they'll kind of bury her parts.
Yes!
And she'll just be kind of a bit player in this.
Right.
And obviously, what the hell do I know?
Well, and I think, Billy, we both had said, we're like, Tim, we're going to see a lot of him. And it wasn't until truly the last 2 episodes that I feel like Tim came into his own. And I'm like, wow, now we're seeing more of him, but we hadn't up in, all 8 episodes.
Well, we boldly predicted that they would have to sing, too, before this thing debuted. And of course, whack, Obviously, you don't, like we know anything, obviously you don't hire these 2 singers.
Hey, we roll deep in humility over here, all 3 of us.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Who's the big winner? In terms of who really moves the ball forward for themselves in this show, who walks away the big winner in this thing?
Isabel May, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think Isabel, and I think Tim McGraw to some extent as well, if he wants it. Honestly, who probably does the most, is, and I forget how you say her name, Gradiala Brancusi. She had never acted before.
Right.
And she didn't have a huge role throughout this, but man, every time she was on screen, I couldn't look away. She was a really captivating, just face on screen to watch, and I thought some of her emotions were really, really dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's who I was gonna say. I think this is one that just really opens up the floodgates for her. I was, like you said, every time she was on screen, I was just very captivated by her, and in a character that she did such a great job of. In the beginning, I didn't really love her because I'm like, girlfriend, you are throwing yourself to every man. Like, let's breathe. Let's take a step back. I can go from annoyed with her character to then falling in love with her character. And I think just an actress being able to do both you're just super talented you don't end up just falling in love with one aspect of her or hating one aspect of her. I ended up really evolving with her, which is interesting.
Yeah. Agreed.
And we end in agreement for once. I'm Addison Hager, and this has been Dutton Rules, a Yellowstone 1883 podcast, and soon to be a 1932 podcast. Big thanks to the hundreds who've emailed at staff@tasteofcountry.com and the tens of thousands of comments on our video content at the Taste of Country YouTube page. Dutton Rules is written by myself and Billy Dukes with special research from Sterling Whitaker. The show was also produced and edited by Billy Dukes. Tap follow if you haven't already, because even though we've got more episodes coming soon, you'll want to be the first to know about season 2 of the podcast, which we're planning right now. I also highly recommend going back for the archive interviews with cast members from both shows. As always, Dutton Rules is another great Town Square Media podcast.
Prescription products require completion of an online medication consultation with an independent healthcare provider through the LifeMD platform and are only available if prescribed. Subscription required. Individual results may vary. Additional restrictions apply. Read all warnings before using GLP-1s. Side effects may include a risk of thyroid C-cell tumors. Do not use GLP-1s if you or your family have a history of thyroid cancer.
If you've struggled for years to lose weight and have given up hope, did you know you can now access GLP-1 prescription medications at TryLifeMD.com? We're now offering eligible patients online access to GLP-1s, the breakthrough prescription medication that can help you lose body fat and weight. Listen to what people are saying.
It's fun to put on jeans that you couldn't get into 6 months ago.
Every morning, I look forward to getting on the scale.
For anybody who's struggling with their weight, it's a godsend.
And here's the best part. Your insurance may cover 100% of the cost of your medication. So go to TryLifeMD.com to have your eligibility checked right now. Get started today at TryLifeMD.com. That's TryLifeMD.com.